Let's compare for a second our browser window APIs with our Node globals. In the browser, whether we're using the V8 engine, like Chrome, or something different, like Firefox or Safari, we tend to deal with different things than Node. So while we have global in Node, we have window in the browser. And in the browser, we tend to deal with HTML and browsing documents instead of processes like a Node script or a Node server that are running on your system. And so on the browser, we have things that help us interact with our browsing history and figure out our location, the current address or URL our browser is pointed to. And there's this navigator object, which gives us access to data about the browser that we're currently using. These things don't make very much sense in Node. But on the other hand, we have access to things like the arguments that were passed into our process. We have information about modules that we've loaded with code and functions that we want to reuse. And because our Node scripts run on our computer and tend to live in files, when we're running Node scripts, we can get the file name of that script. And there's also __ dir name for the directory in which your script lives. As we'll see later in the course, these things will all be very useful for us when writing Node applications. But probably the most important one is this require function here, which we'll dive really deeply into because you'll see it in just about every Node program. But for now, just know that the require function here is built into Node's globals, and it allows us to import functions and modules, many of which allow us to do things that browsers wouldn't allow us to do. For example, to read and write files on your system, and even to create a server that serves those files over the internet. Now, this is all really high level, and I promise we'll be digging into all of this in way more detail, but I just wanted to give you a breakdown of some of the more common globals that Node provides for us and compare them to what we have in the browser. For a complete list of globals, we can go to our Node documentation here and scroll down to the globals page, where we can see all of our globals, including the dir name and file name, which we mentioned, as well as some that we haven't seen before, like the exports and the set timeout function here, which you might be familiar with from the browser. It's the equivalent of the set timeout function that we have on the window object. Just like the URL down here is the Node equivalent of the URL class that we can access in our browser console. And we can see that this URL class, if we go to the URL section here, is browser compatible. It follows this WhatWG URL standard, where WhatWG is a community including Apple and Mozilla that's responsible for many of the web standards, including HTML. And this URL class follows browser conventions to help us work with addresses like example.org. This is an example of how Node has gotten much better in recent versions at bridging the gap between code we write on the browser and code that we write in Node. We can see an example of this in how this was added relatively recently in version 10.0 in 2018. Little changes like the addition of the URL class make our life when going from front-end to back-end code, which we'll be talking about next, just a little bit easier. Alright, so now that we have a better understanding of the relationship between JavaScript and Node.js, and how JavaScript in the browser differs from JavaScript in Node, let's take a quick break, and I'll see you in the next video.